great concern the just concluded Africa Forward Summit held in Nairobi, Kenya, co-chaired by His Excellency President William Ruto and His Excellency President Emmanuel Macron. While the summit was presented as a platform for equal partnership and mutual respect between Africa and France, we as a party believe progressive African movements across the continent must continually and critically examine the historical and present-day realities, as well as the future of France's engagement in Africa. We acknowledge that international partnerships are necessary in today's interconnected world. Indeed, Africa must engage globally in trade, in diplomacy, in technology, education, and even in investment. However, such engagements must be rooted in what we call transparency, upholding sovereignty, equality, dignity, and genuine mutual benefit, not hidden geopolitical interests or repackaged neo-colonial arrangements which are disguised as partnerships. Members of the Fourth Estate, for decades, many countries in the Sahel region accused France of maintaining exploitative economic and military influence long after formal colonialism ended. The growing anti-French sentiment witnessed in countries such as Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger did not emerge in a vacuum. It all rose from long-standing frustrations over foreign control of strategic resources, military interventions, and economic systems that many Africans believe disproportionately benefited France while leaving African citizens in poverty. The PM party's position is that, citing the example of a country such as Niger, for example, has historically been one of the world's major uranium producers, supplying fuel critical to France's nuclear energy sector. Yet, despite its strategic mineral wealth, Niger has remained among the poorest countries in the world for decades. This contradiction became a major symbol of the unequal economic relationships many Africans associate with the old Francafrique system. Following the expulsion of the French troops and deterioration of relations between France and several governments in the Sahel region, France has faced geopolitical and commercial setbacks in the region, including uncertainty surrounding resource operations and decline in its traditional political influence across parts of West Africa. We see France's new dalliance with Anglophone African countries, such as our great country Kenya, more of an attempt to rebuild and reposition its relationship with Africa beyond its former colonies. The PM party also believes Africa cannot discuss justice, sovereignty, and democratic reform without confronting the painful history of foreign interference on the continent. Across Africa's post-independence history, several leaders who challenged foreign domination, economic exploitation, or neo-colonialism influence were overthrown or assassinated under controversial circumstances. Examples such as the iconic Pan-African leaders such as Patrice Lumumba of the former Democratic Republic of Congo, Thomas Sankara of Burkina Faso, Muammar Gaddafi of Libya remain symbols of resistance against foreign control and economic dependency in Africa. Ladies and gentlemen, there is ongoing debate about the impact and direct role of major global powers in Africa in recent years, framed around the Africa +1 summit. Many Africans view these patterns as part of a broader history of external interference by nations pursuing their own interests at the expense of the African people and nation. We as a party, therefore, find it deeply hypocritical for our President William Ruto to speak about peace, justice, democracy, and reform of global governance structures, while his own administration continues to face serious accusations of repression, including extrajudicial killings, you know about the Gen Z killings, violent suppression of Gen Z protesters, and the use of state-backed intimidation through goonism against political dissenters or politically dissenting views. Equally concerning are the growing regional controversies surrounding Kenya's involvement in conflicts such as the one in Sudan. At a time when Sudan continues to suffer one of the world's worst humanitarian crises, Kenya should position herself as a neutral advocate for peace and dialogue, rather than inviting allegations of political alignment that undermine regional trust. President Ruto and President Macron used the African Forward Summit to call for reforms within the United Nations Security Council and the broader international financial architecture. While Africa indeed deserves fair representation within these global governance institutions, credibility matters. We as a party believe that genuine reform cannot be championed by leaders who undermine democratic accountability and transparency within their own jurisdictions. The PM party is also concerned by growing military and strategic cooperation agreements between Kenya and foreign powers. Kenyan citizens have a right to know and question whether such arrangements genuinely serve national interests or risk turning our country into a strategic outpost for foreign geopolitical agenda, especially after they were granted immunity for anything they do here in the Kenyan soil. We all know the example of the Iran-US-Israel war and the repercussions in countries, especially in the Gulf state. Countries that were just perceived to be associated with certain powers ended up being victims of the war that was going on in that region. And that is why, as a party, we are concerned about this growing military and strategic cooperation. If it goes unchecked, it might be troublesome for us in the nearest future. We reject any attempt to reintroduce neo-colonial influence in Africa through military partnerships, economic dependency, political capture, or elite-driven diplomacy conducted without public participation. We particularly reject narratives that attempt to market unequal power relations as mutual partnerships, while historical injustices, exploitation, and opaque agreements remain unresolved. As true believers of Pan-Africanism, we stand in solidarity with African peoples demanding dignity, sovereignty, economic justice, democratic accountability, and the full control over Africa's resources and future. So as a party, we make the following demands. One, we demand that there be a full public disclosure of all agreements, memoranda, and commitments signed between the government of Kenya and the government of France during and around the Africa Forward Summit. Number two, we demand immediate parliamentary and public scrutiny of any military, economic, or strategic agreements entered into by the Kenyan government, as well as any immunity granted to France. Number three, a foreign policy rooted in Pan-African solidarity, constitutionalism, and a protection of national sovereignty. And finally, number four, respect for the constitutional right of Kenyan citizens to access information as guaranteed in our constitution under Article 35. Africa does not need new managers of exploitation. Africa needs partnerships built on truth, accountability, sovereignty, and justice. PM. That marks the end of our statements. Unless this wonderful lady wants to add some.
No, just strongly concurring.
Okay. Okay.
Maybe a question.
Yeah.
You talking about you actually suspicion the relationship between Kenya and France, or is it between the president of Kenya and the president of France? In their individual capacities, or in their capacities as or in the relationship between the two countries?
No, I think from where we start, we sit. All we are asking is that some level of transparency, because Kenyan government has been getting into many agreements that are not as public as they ought to be. So we are not specifically addressing individual relations. That can stay as is. But we are more concerned about what is in need for the Kenyan people. And that's why we've given context within the statement as to where our concerns are coming from. There are existing concerns across the African region, particularly in the West African region, as how they are relating with France. So we are saying as Kenya, can we be more transparent? You know, this new dalliance must actually be headed somewhere. That somewhere is still not clear. And that is why we are saying, as a party, that there ought to be some level of scrutiny by Parliament so as to ascertain, are these agreements beneficial to Kenya? You know, for example, as a country we are struggling with public debt. What if part of that agreement is increasing that public debt? What will happen to our economy? So that's why we are saying there ought to be thorough scrutiny by Parliament and the public. We invite members of the public, experts in international relations to, engage in this debate so that we can really unpack what is in it for the Kenyan country, for the Kenyan citizens, so that we don't burden our people anymore. And again, we have also cited security situations that should be of concern to this country. If today France, based on the agreement, and God forbid, gets into conflict with another country, what does that translate to Kenya? Those are the questions we are asking. And unless government comes out and unpacks that with clarity, so that Kenyans know what are we signing up for. Yeah. So they wanted extra voice.
Okay, an extra voice.
Are we so our artists being used to entertain the France president? I do think it's a bad thing because people felt like the government is using them to sanitize what's going on.
Okay, on the issue to do with the artists, we will not talk about artists because these are people, these are Kenyans, and there are also Kenyans who are in business, and there are also Kenyans who are there to interact with other African countries and also make their own relationship, build their own relationships as artists. So we'll not talk about that. I will just reiterate on what he has said on the pertinent issues that Kenyans are asking on matters to do with the atrocities that were done to our fellow Africans at the West. So we as Kenyans, also as Africans, we are also asking the same. What is the relationship between the president of France, who was the colony of the West Africans, with Kenyans? So these pertinent questions need to be asked. And then, number two, we have underlying issues as a country. Are these issues going to be addressed? Because we have had agreements with other countries. There is nothing that has been brought on the table to Kenyans that Kenyans can talk about it and say that this is something tangible that will help assist Kenyans. So what is the relationship between the president of France with our president? Thank you.
Thank you.